In this hint, we're going to look at the concepts of consumer and producer surplus, utilizing a supply and demand graph, and we'll look at how we might utilize these concepts. So we'll start off with a regular supply and demand diagram with price and quantity. We'll draw in a downward sloping demand curve and an upward sloping supply curve. And we will show the normal market equilibrium where supply equals demand as P1, Q1. We're going to see that the triangle represented here from the P1 upward to where the demand curve crosses the price axis, this whole triangle that's been shaded in, we're going to refer to that as consumer surplus. And we're going to refer to this triangle, which is the area below P1 as far as the supply curve and everything in between in that triangle. That's going to be referred to as producer surplus. And we're going to use this framework to demonstrate that the sum of these surpluses, the consumer plus producer surplus, that entire large triangle, is going to be maximized when we allow this market to go to its equilibrium, or here that's P1 and Q1. Let's first think about why consumer surplus and producer surplus are named as they are. So I put some numbers on the scales for price and quantity here. And if we ask ourselves, how much would the consumers be willing to pay for the first unit? It looks like it's something like $8.75, $8.50, okay? But if this market is actually in equilibrium, right, that the equilibrium price is going to be $5, which means that consumers will not need to pay that $8.75 for that first unit. They will only need to pay $5. Okay, this means that this is the amount they have to pay for the first unit, $5. And this is the amount that they receive as psychic welfare that they don't have to pay for. So that is what we are thinking about when we say consumer surplus. Okay, that's the consumer surplus of the first unit. So let's go to the second unit. Okay, the second unit looks like consumers would be willing to pay something like $7.50 for that, and they are able to just get away with paying $5 because of the equilibrium price there of $5, and now they pile up some more consumer surplus. And if you can see how this is going, for the third unit, looks like they would be willing to pay about $6, and they only have to pay $5. So again, we have more consumer surplus right here. Okay, so you can see that at the end of the day, they will have paid, if we're in equilibrium, they will have paid $5 per unit times 4 units, or $20. Whereas the total welfare they've received from these 4 units is actually this entire area under the demand curve up to the equilibrium quantity of 4. And the difference between this total welfare, that area, and the amount the consumers actually had to pay is this triangle, which represents the total consumer surplus. So we're just going to color that in the rest of the way here, because if we were actually buying this stuff one little smidgen at a time, we would fill in all the little gaps. So now let's calculate what consumer surplus is. Well, we've already established that consumers have to pay $5 equilibrium price times 4 equilibrium quantity, or a total of $20. So now let's calculate consumer surplus. Well, for consumer surplus, we want to get the area of this triangle, and that's going to be what? 1/2 times its base times its height. Okay? So the height is going to be this intercept of $10 minus the equilibrium price of $5. So here's my 10 minus $5, okay? Times my base, which is going to be from 0 to my equilibrium quantity of 4, so it's 4 minus 0, so that's just 4 right here, okay? And then once I do that, I'm going to also be dividing by 2 because, you know, with that 5 times 4, I'm getting this whole rectangle, and I only want half of that, so that's the dividing by 2. So 10 minus 5 is 5, times 4 is 20, divided by 2 is $10 in consumer surplus. Now, I would like to ask you if you can imagine calculating for yourself the producer surplus, and I'll let you do this on your own, but what you would be doing is trying to get the area of this triangle, right? Because why? Because suppliers must cover their costs, which are reflected in the supply curve, which means that when they sell 4 units, that all of this area under the supply curve represents costs to them. They receive this paid rectangle of 5 times 4, as we've already established. So this upper triangle here is the area that they receive that they did not have to pay in terms of cost. So that is the producer surplus. So I will let you calculate that on your own. So recall that we calculated consumer surplus in our last slide at $10. When you calculated producer surplus, you should have come up with $6. If you didn't, go back and try it again. So that the total here, the total surplus for society is equal to the 10 plus the 6, or $16. So this is the case at equilibrium price and quantity. What I'd like to do now is pick a different price that's not equilibrium and check and see if that surplus could be as high or higher as it is here at equilibrium. So let's hypothesize that we have a price floor of $6. That means that price cannot go below $6. That might be the case, for example, with an agricultural commodity that Congress has intervened with. Now, at this price of $6, suppliers are very happy with this and would be willing to supply actually 7 units of this product. Consumers, on the other hand, are only willing to purchase 3 units of the product at a price of $6. Okay? Therefore, we have what is known as excess supply or surplus. And I want to emphasize that this concept of surplus is completely different than the consumer surplus and producer surplus that we have been talking about. Now, without actually calculating it, I want to see if you can see that the combined consumer and producer surplus at this new price of $6 is going to be lower than it was at equilibrium. Recall that the combined producer and consumer surplus at equilibrium was the area of this entire triangle, right? Okay. So let's see what area would be the consumer surplus now at a price of $6. Well, look carefully, and this would be this triangle, right? the one from $6 to $10 and then up. It has shrunk, okay? It's gone down. Now the producer surplus, or the area above the supply curve but below price, is going to be a different kind of a shape. It's going to start here at this $6, come down along 3 units, right, and then stop at the supply curve. So it's going to be this irregularly shaped area, all of that, okay? So I think you can see that this triangle that I'm going to shade in right here was part of the combined welfare, part of consumer surplus plus producer surplus, that is now completely lost. It's not part of the new consumer surplus, which is up here. It's not part of the new producer surplus, which is this area here, right? So we call this triangle the deadweight loss. When the price was changed from $5 to $6, consumers definitely lost in terms of consumer surplus. Producers gained some, but the net amount for both combined actually went down by the amount of this deadweight loss. So society as a whole is not as well off as it was before. You will find that if you choose any other price along this axis, anything at all other than equilibrium price of $5, that you would find the same result. And we can use these concepts of consumer and producer surplus and the total of social welfare for many other applications.